This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey, everybody, it is Rosie. It is time for our quarterly installment of the Courageous Leadership series. This is where my dear friend, Nikki Llewellyn-Gregory, turns the tables on me, and she takes the lead in the conversation and the interview, and we jam out about various aspects and topics related to showing up as a courageous leader in our lives and creating courageous cultures in organizations. And today we are digging into that self-limiting narrative we tell ourselves, that programming we have, the head trash we have, some really key things that help us navigate that. Nikki has a really awesome analogy of a staircase that we started to use to guide this conversation. We talk about some really exciting research that we're releasing and work that we have that's coming up. A lot of normalizing this messiness of being human and a lot of our humanity that is kind of hijacking us these days. So I hope that you get some good nuggets and some good insights out of this conversation.
Hey, it's Nikki Llewellyn-Gregory here with my friend and coach, Dr. Rosie Ward, on the fabulous Show Up as a Leader podcast. I look forward to these episodes so much. And today's topic, gosh, I want to challenge myself. I want to challenge you, the listeners. We're going to learn from Rosie on how to change our talk track. Let's talk about our own self-talk and why we allow self-limiting stories in as much as we do. We all do it. Like, Rosie, I bet you even do it sometimes.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I want to break this down because you know what? In this new year, we are going to be programmed in a new way, in a better way. And so I just love to start with, like, Rosie, in your journey of working alongside leaders, working on this topic area deeply, what have you found on, like, why do we do this? And what are those traditional stories that we're doing way too much pattern around this negative self-talk?
Yeah. Well, I could talk about this for like hours. So I'm excited. I'm excited to have this conversation, Nikki. And this is a passion project of mine because, as you know, every guest episode, I ask all of my guests, what is a self-limiting story they tell themselves? And part of why I like to do that is I always tell them before they come on that my secondary purpose of the show, besides having conversations and tangible things people can do to have more human and effective workplaces, is to normalize the messiness of being human. And no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, like I teach this stuff and good Lord, like I still, I'm human. No matter how successful someone appears to be, however we define success, they're a human being. And as human beings, we are hardwired to get in our own way. And we get in our own way with, I call it the head trash. it's the stories and the stuff we tell ourselves. And so I think part of normalizing the messiness of being human is recognizing that as a species, we are literally wired to make sense of our experiences by creating a narrative, by creating story. If you even think back before there was language, like, in cave people sitting around fires and, telling stories, and even indigenous populations, they tell stories, and that's how stuff gets passed down before there was ever a written language. Like, that is how we make sense, is we create a narrative. And as a species, like every species on this planet, we are wired for survival. So we are wired to be on really high alert for danger, high alert for threats. And why that is so important to know is that our brains actually don't know the difference between a real physical threat, like there's a wild animal that's going to charge at me, or a perceived social threat. You might judge me. You might think less of me. You might reject me. You might fill in the blank. And so we learn at a really, really early age how to look good and how to avoid looking bad. And it doesn't matter if we had a happy childhood or a really traumatic childhood or anything in between. It is how we make sense of our experiences. So either our own lived experiences, like we went through it, or we observed others around us and we created a narrative of, ooh, I don't ever want that to happen to me. So therefore, I'm going to fill in the blank from now on. So we create these narratives that are either about how the world works, and it's a flawed sense of causality. If I do this, then fill in the blank is going to happen. Or it is a really flawed version of our sense of value. Like our value proposition is solely attached to some quality. Like I have to be productive, or I have to achieve, or I have to not be selfish or be helpful, or whatever it is. And then we think that that's the only way we can add value. So we get really stuck in that. Or it turns into really, like I call it the rabbit hole of doom. We go down a pit of doom of like the consequences are too severe, so I'm not even going to risk it. So we create this world for ourselves that is very safe, but it is very small and it's limited because it's formed off of a 10-year-old brain because we create these narratives in those early years of our life. And then that version of ourselves is still in the driver's seat. So that's my long-winded way of like, that's why we do it because we're human. If you think you're not going to, you think someone doesn't, newsflash, but like, it doesn't matter how much work someone's done on themselves. We all do this. It's a question of, are we aware of it? Is it still hijacking us? Have we learned what those stories are enough that we can catch it when that script tries to take over? And we can actually kick our 10-year-old self to the back seat so our adult kick-ass version can be in the driver's seat because I wouldn't let my 10-year-old drive my car. And so, yeah, so we all do it. And I think the sooner we recognize it, then we go, well, okay, how can I recognize those stories and how do I move beyond it? But to pretend that we don't, I mean, I've done a lot of work on myself. Those stories are still there, but I've gotten really good at catching it. And it's like I catch it quick, usually, and go, oh, there you are again. I don't have to listen to you because I've done a boatload of work to try to like recognize you. But it still shows up. It doesn't ever disappear.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, isn't it fascinating as I'm sitting here listening to you talk? And this is such a norm for humans, right? As humans, we all fall into this. And sometimes more often than not in certain seasons of life. And so you were like, we create a narrative. And then we also talked about we lean into head trash by default a lot of times. And it's like, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, would I ever consciously choose head trash, choose negative thoughts? Like, I would never be doing that consciously. So much of this is about our conscious awareness, right? And so maybe let's start there. If we're like building a foundation, that's the foundation, is more conscious than not. And so talk a little bit more about awareness and consciousness and some of the things that you've done to apply or taught others so that we can do that more often than the head trash game.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a really good point is we have to be conscious of it. And so many of us don't realize that we are telling ourselves a story. We take it as fact. We don't think it's a story. For us, it's this reality. It is, no, this is how the world works. No, this is true. No, this is real. And so I think the first thing is we have to start to recognize, well, how do you know it's real? How do you know that that's a fact? And so one of the processes that we take people through is actually a transformative process from Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy from Harvard called Immunity to Change. And we start with someone who has an improvement goal, something they want to get better at that they can't just will themselves to do. Like, I want to get better at having healthy boundaries. I want to get better at feedback. I want to get better at delegating. It's very tangible things that are noble, but for whatever reason, we only get so far. Like maybe we've made some progress, but it keeps coming back or it's the thorn in our side. It's something that so many leaders struggle with. And then we start looking at, well, what are all the ways you're inadvertently working against yourselves? Like instead of setting boundaries, I'm checking emails at all hours. I don't unplug when I'm on vacation. Instead of delegating, I'm controlling everything. I'm taking things on and doing it myself. I'm avoiding having difficult conversations, whatever it is. And then here's the key. We get to the yuck factor. When you think about something you want to do, but you're holding yourself back, and I don't care what it is, if it's having a difficult conversation, if it's setting boundaries, if it's going after a goal in your life, whatever it is, if you think about what is it fundamentally that feels unsettling or feels risky or feels worrisome. And when people start to get really, really honest with themselves, that worry, that yuck factor is usually around what people are going to think. They're going to think I'm irresponsible. I'm going to look stupid. I'm going to find out I'm not perfect. I'm going to validate that I'm not enough. People won't like me. I won't be loved. I won't be in control. I won't be right. It's these very real things about our identity or what people will think of us that usually is at stake. And until we get really clear that we're running off of fear, it's a fear-based, scarcity-based mindset, we're not going to realize that we're telling ourselves a story, right? If you just run it as fact of like, no, you know what? No one can do it as good as me. And if I don't control this stuff, people don't do stuff and it all falls apart. Well, now you've enabled everybody around you that, of course, they're not going to do it as good as you because you never give them a shot, but you don't realize you're doing that. You take it as fact of my team's unreliable. If I don't control it, bad stuff will happen. You don't realize it's actually a fear-based story that you're telling yourself. So we have to start to really look at where are the areas in our life where I'm frustrated. Like maybe I'm frustrated because I feel like my team isn't stepping up. Well, okay. So what would you need to do differently for your team to step up? Like what part do you play in it? Not blaming your team, but what part do you play? right? And then you go, oh, well, I need to delegate more. But every time I do, it's a nightmare and it's more work than it's worth. Well, let's just sit with that. If you needed to delegate more, what feels unsettling about it, right? Or it's, let's say that that your frustration points or things that are holding you back or keeping you from having the results you want to have is because you're not having these conversations, but you have an excuse. They're not going to listen. They're not whatever. It's going to piss people off. They're going to quit. They're not going to believe you. You don't have the time. If you just leave it alone, it'll get better. This isn't the right time. Like, so we have to go to where the areas we're stuck, we're frustrated, we're insecure, and there's something there. And then I think as we look at that closer, that's where we can start to see, oh, there is some kind of programming or some kind of head trash or some kind of narrative that is holding us back. But so often when we start working with people, they literally don't realize that there is that. They're like, oh, I'm sure I tell myself stories. But until we map it out, there it's literally a programmed script that is a reality for them that it's like, no, this is just truth. Because if I say I'm telling myself a story, well, I can fact check the story and I can go, well, it's just a story. But if I literally am like, no, this is fact, this is truth in my world, then it makes it harder to see that there's any opening to even do anything different about it. So we have to start to recognize where we're stuck and start to look at where might there be a narrative that we're holding as truth or we're holding as fact that might actually just be that head trash story.
That's really good. And you're challenging me here because at first, the way that I was coming into this is a lot of times my self talk is based on like my lack of centering in the morning and then just allowing my energy to take over. And then I just get in my head and it's like, I know what I needed to do. I'm just running at this fast pace and I'm not being conscious and present to be able to be what I needed, but I know what's real, right? Like, so that's kind of where I was coming at it. And then I just was thinking after you're sharing this other way of looking at it, I'm like, okay, let's run a scenario here. So I tried to present at a meeting and I fumbled because I was nervous. So now my talk track is I can't present and I'm not a public speaker. Versus I tried to present at a meeting and I fumbled because I was nervous. So I'm going to put this on my next coaching session topic to work through with my coach. Or I've got this reflection tool that I use to like draw a line down the center to look at like what's real, what's not, and like use this tool to help myself, like see something differently. Right. And I think that's where like those are the two ways of like sometimes we have a toolbox of things and other times it's like, we just literally believe these things and we just allow ourselves to go deeper and spiral into this thing that's not real, right?
100%. Well, and here's the other thing, Nikki, is that back that up for a second, because if you, let's say you were nervous and you fumbled and you didn't, do something well, like in this case, speaking at a meeting, if you immediately go to, well, I'm just not going to speak up again, or, I'm a horrible presenter, or I suck at this, or whatnot, I guarantee you that wasn't the first time that happened. And you know what? Not to get all psychoanalysis, that's not what this is about, but I bet you if you look back, maybe there was a time you spoke up in school and you had the wrong answer and people laughed. Or maybe there was a time you didn't, but you observed a classmate do it and you're like, oh, hell no, that's never going to be me. Or maybe you didn't do so well on something and now you're holding on to that as fact. And this actually was just like a trigger reminder and a reinforcer of that you don't even realize. And so often, like when we come to that conclusion, this wasn't an isolated incident. I guarantee this was not an isolated incident.
Totally. Yes. So if we look at this, and we've done this a couple times before, and you're helping to coach me, for some reason, this visual helps me. It's like walking up a staircase. So it's like this bottom layer, would you call it awareness? Like the first step
Yeah.
is
Oh,
awareness
yeah.
and this consciousness. And then, I'm starting to think about, you had just mentioned something about triggers a minute ago. Is that kind of walking up the steps there, like noticing those triggers so that we don't fall back into this wasn't an isolated moment of this one time that I got nervous speaking. You're right, like a traditional pattern, right? But I have to understand those triggers because it's going to happen again. I'm human. I'm going to fumble, right? So what does that look like? That kind of next step of awareness of triggers and how we handle this for ourselves.
Yeah, I like thinking about that. And we always say awareness always grows faster than anything else. And so part of what makes this work challenging is we call this the messy middle of, oh, I'm now aware that I do it, or I'm aware that I have that narrative, but now I don't know what to do. And so I just want to put that out there of like, welcome to the messiness of being human. But I think, okay, so we're aware that I did this or I'm holding myself back. Now we have to start to look at what are the triggers. Is it certain types of people? Is it certain types of circumstances? Is it certain types of conditions, within ourselves or externally to us? Like some people might notice, oh my gosh, where I'm holding myself back is with people of authority, or I'm holding myself back with peers, or I'm holding myself back with fill in the blank, or it's when the stakes are high, or it's when I'm tired and I'm not well rested, or it's when I have a lot on my plate or I haven't set boundaries. So we have to start to really be cognizant of when does it show up and kind of give ourselves space to observe. When does it show up and seem to get in my way? When does it not? And what can I learn from that? Because there's nuances in that. And then we go, okay, so then when I know that, then if you want to go proactive, it's not going to be the be all end all to circumvent a head trash self-limiting story, if you will. But one of the exercises that I think you and I maybe have talked about this, Nikki, but I've been giving more recently to some of my clients who are working through their head trash is being really clear about the ingredients to be their best. Like, who are you when you're at your best, and what ingredients increase the likelihood that that version of you can show up? Because if you're not well rested or you're overscheduled or whatever that looks like for you, the chances that those triggers
Like
are.
my morning practice that I shared. Like when I don't do that, I can pretty much predict the day. So therefore, always do it.
Yep. And even with that, the head trash can still show up, but there's going to be a greater likelihood that or it's the above below the line. Like if I know I'm below the line, I have to be extra diligent those days to pause, to take a deep breath, because I just know that I'm not running at the best version of me. So I think it's, yes, we've got to, one, be aware. Two, we've got to understand our triggers. Three, we've got to understand what kind of supporting surrounding systems do we need to help us be our best, to be able to tackle or lean into those triggers or to not get triggered by them. Then when we go further up, it's okay. I mean, I like this analogy of a staircase actually, but then it's like, okay, now that I do that, it's how do I either fact check that narrative or replace it with something more helpful? Because there's something about labeling that I'm telling myself a story that suddenly gives that script running in our head less power versus it's a fact, it's truth. It's saying like, this is a story I'm telling myself. This is a story. How do I find out if that story is true? Or this is a story. Is this story still true today? Because maybe it was true a year ago, right? Because we tend to hold on to grudges and stuff too. So maybe it was true when I was a kid. Maybe it was true a year ago. But like, is this story still true today? And is it serving me well? Or is it preventing me from having the impact I want to have? And so we start to really question those stories we're telling ourselves to go, what am I gaining by holding on to you? And what is possible if I tried on a different story? And what might that open up for me? And, it's not like we have to sit in an hour-long meditative state to do that, but we have to start being really deliberate about where is this coming from? Is this still true? Is it serving me well? Could I try on a different story? And see if that story starts to kind of write over the old one and give us better results and have a better quality life and a better impact.
I was just thinking about like old school recipe cards. Like I think of my grandma, she'd have her recipe card out there, the 3.5 by 5 card or whatever. It's like if we just had this like recipe for, I think you called it the best version of me. And that was just in front of us regularly. So I think you should do an event, a show up as a leader event. And this, we all build our like recipe cards. And it's like that thing never leaves our morning practice of like, here's who I am going to be today. This is my best version of me. Cause like nobody doesn't want to be that. It's just like keeping that in our front and center. The best leaders, how do they support this well in others? Like what are some of those just ways that they show up, those unique factors that allow just others to really be their best because the way the leader is showing up?
Yeah, I love this question. Well, one, the leader has to do their own work. So I'm thinking of like one of our clients, I'm working with their executive team, and one of the executives has done like the ingredients to be my best. And that has been a game changer for this person because they're recognizing where their energy flows throughout the day. And when they have really critical opportunities to be in front of either key clients or employees, and they're like, how do I want to show up? They look at how their schedule is managed and where they need to have buffer time and whatnot because of just how they're wired and even how they schedule their travel. And how they schedule their travel is different than some other people on their team. And so being really cognizant of being true to no, I'm not trying to be anyone else. I'm trying to be me. And when I don't do this, I show up guarded, I show up armored, I show up reactive, I show up, being disconnected and like just not as the version of me that I want to show up. So I share that because I think one, we've got to know this for ourselves, but this is why like all of the work we do for the most part is a parallel process where yes, we're doing individual development work and coaching with leaders, and we're also doing team-based work so they create a core and common language. Because there's a well-known saying that you can't take a changed person and put them into an unchanged environment and expect anything to be different. And so why I share that is when you think about how do you lead a team, if you're not having open conversations with your team about like the ingredients to be your best exercise, I think we have that in our Rehumanizing the Workplace book. It's not nothing like fancy and other people do versions of it. Do that with your teams and find out, like, if I know that whatever someone on my team needs to be their best, then I can support that. Or how can I support you this week? Or how are you tending to this? I think I've said this before. Like, we use like the glass ball, wood ball, rubber ball analogy on our team for prioritizing projects. And we always say that a glass ball is client deliverables and self care. And self care can look for a variety of different things, but like, what do you need in different stages of life? You might need different things, but we're having those conversations. And so I think as a leader, if you don't know what your team members need to be their best, if you're not having those conversations, if you're not helping them sift through things so that they can, you know what, this isn't ideal, but what does the best version of you look like in this season? You're going through a really tough time. You've got, an aging parent or a death in the family or an illness. Okay, your best version during this season may not be the best that you normally can do, but let's look at this time. And if you don't know that as a leader, you're going to be judging them because they're not performing like they normally do or because they're not able to do what they normally do. And so I think we have to do the work ourselves, but we have to have this dialogue and do some of this work and ask teams to be vulnerable and build that trust so that we know what each other needs because this is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. We're hardwired for connection and we can't do this by ourselves.
That's so good. I love that your first response was, well, the leader needs to be doing it themselves. Like that is I think you've said that so many times on different episodes. It's like we model the way. And so knowing the awareness, the triggers, the best version of ourselves, it has to be done for us as leaders in order to, really see it stick with anybody else or for anyone else to even want to pay attention and listen to us. So love that you said that. Then I loved your power question of what does the best version of you look like in this season? And I think many times we overlook that during humanity, things change a lot. It's kind of like when we used to do the old school surveys. Once a year, we're going to ask our people, for feedback on how they're doing. It's like things can change every single week. And so, how do we stay in touch with our people? Best version of you look like in this season and regularly asking that question. Love that so much. So we'll use that as a toolbox for leaders today, that powerful question. You said something about building vulnerability and trust on teams to lead that for others. Give us an example of just like this powerful question that leaders could use in a one-on-one. What's one of your favorite activities for building vulnerability and trust on teams?
Yeah, well, I think I've probably shared this before as well, but one of the simple things, and this gets into like psychological safety, but as a formal leader, because obviously anyone can be a leader, you have to go first. So for those people who are listening who have that role, I know you, Nikki, have that on your team, but it is, saying like, hey, like I've got this going on in my life or, whatnot. And so bear with me this week, or I might be slower to respond to emails. Like you have to model that stuff first whether that's, I will do that in a team setting, but then one-on-one, like, again, what can I do to support you this week? Is there anything I should be aware of? I always ask, so on Mondays, we do a check-in for the week, and I always ask, are there any challenges, obstacles, or roadblocks that you know of or are anticipated or worried about? And is there anything I could do to support you? So it's not like you are by yourself. You have to struggle through this. Is there anything that I can do as your leader to support you or escalate or whatnot? I mean, that's a very simple tactical thing. At the end of the week, we always do a quick check-in on Fridays to reflect back on the week. And a lot of people like to look at the wins, which is great. And we do that too. Like, what's the highlight of the week? So you're ending the week reflecting like, hey, we made an impact. We had a good week. But we do F up Fridays. And F up Fridays, I go first as a leader. And everyone knows that they need to share something. And it's what is your biggest squiggle, detour, misstep, challenge, right? So I mean, it doesn't have to be a big F up. And then here's the key, it's what'd you learn from it? Because some of our best process improvements have come from F Up Friday shares. And if we didn't have that deliberate practice, then I don't know that we actually would have had some of the awesome, like, oh my gosh, we should be doing this differently. And now it turns into via Slack or even a huddle. It's F Up Friday on a Tuesday. Here we go. And people are openly now sharing like missteps or challenges, which is what you want. You don't want people holding that stuff back in dangerous silence. So, I mean, those are very just simple tactical things, but it's also like, I think I've done a Rosie in my pocket on this. We do a 2-word check-in. 2 words, how are you feeling today? And when someone on my team checks in with words that are, it's like, okay, we're going to get through the huddle quick. And then it's, what do you need? Do you even need to be here today? What can we take off your plate, etc. And creating a space where people can say, like, this is not a good day, or, nope, I'm right. I'm calling it a nope day. Those are just simple but very tangible things. It's like marbles in the marble jar. It starts to build trust and build that psychological safety.
So good. And when we just think about, the power of story, and I know we're talking a lot today about self-talk, you think about stories that really connect people, and they typically open up with a relatable situation, like a time in life that was really challenging, right? It's what connects people. And so it's just interesting, as you're saying, rather than Friday wins, it's like the big shiny bright, whatever is not really what connects people. So I love that, sharing the fail forward lesson from a true connection, like human to human, but also the let me shortcut somebody else from this, painful failure or whatever version of painful it was. I love that. That's so good. So in this realm of, I know you do a ton of this work at Salveo and are always talking about this on the show around just meeting people with where they are with what's happening inside their mind. I think there's a lot more coming in this next year from you all on this topic because it's really important. Tell us a little bit more about what's coming from you all to help keep our talk track solid.
Well, I'm geeky excited about this, Nikki. So yeah, we always reference other people's research, which is great. And we, in all of the years that we've been working with leaders and teams, and then the years of having this podcast, my brain works in patterns, and I've started to see patterns emerging. And I would anecdotally, probably a couple of years ago, say to people, well, I don't know, I'm convinced there's probably only 8 or 10 of these like self-limiting stories. Like we all have them. Like I just start to see this narrative, like something around control, something around perfection, something around this. Like I don't know, but it's like I just see patterns. And I thought, we have a lot of data. Why don't we actually start for real digging into this rather than just, anecdotally? So we've spent the last year, which anyone that understands research, especially qualitative research, it is a beast of an undertaking. But we took transcripts from 4 years of podcast interviews where we ask leaders what's a self-limiting story they tell themselves. And we also ask, like, what's a behavior they think leaders should have to have more human workplaces. We took data from hundreds of coaching clients going through this immunity to change coaching process of like, what are they trying to work on and get better at that they can't do by themselves? What are the fears and what's that yuck? What is that head trash? And we did this whole analysis to go, what commonalities are we seeing? What percentages? And we're calling them the faulty programs. And we've actually identified 7 faulty programs. And there's 3 additional ones that are like cousins. And I will tell you what's been really reassuring, Nikki, is like as I've bounce these back to clients, but also as I've done some speaking engagements recently and I've embedded these in and I'm like, how many of these resonate? And every single person's hand go up. They're like, oh my God. And so what we're doing is we're going to be releasing the results in a white paper with like, what do you do with these? And how do you understand this? Like, hey, your people probably need to work on this. And then we have a book that's going to be forthcoming as well. So we've got lots of stuff that is coming out and we're going to dive deep into each of these programs and here you go and here's a story and here's things you can do. We're even gonna be creating a little assessment, so like which one do you think is you? And so we just have a lot of really cool stuff around this data. So I'm excited that our own original research is finally coming out. And then it's not just that, it's like, oh my gosh, like welcome to being human. And like we're even going to be debunking some stuff that we found around imposter syndrome and just some of the other narratives and how they couple and how they go together and how they show up. So yeah, that's some of the stuff that we're going to be unveiling and digging more deeply into in the next year and beyond. So I'm geeky excited about it because I just want people to know that they're normal when they're messy and that they're not alone. And here you go, like you're in good company. And let's just talk about that instead of judging yourself for it or judging your neighbor for it. Let's just own the fact that we're a human being, we're not a robot. And then now let's figure out a path forward. And that's what I'm really excited about. So
Wow. Well, I had no idea when I asked that question that you all are really becoming like the go-to place for working on inner narrative programming and things. That's awesome. And the other thing for me is like I was kind of coming at this today, this conversation from like a lens of maybe 2 points of a star when there's like 5, just from what I'm taking away today. So it's so much more complex. And, like we said, it goes back to like awareness is key. And it's like there's many things I wasn't even aware of that are very applicable to my negative self-talk that I'm like, dang, I am doing that. Like, but just, spending time in this conversation today, being more aware. And so thank you for all you're doing to help us all, like, just because it's part of being human and it keeps us from having more of those, what do you call it? Like your best version of me days, right? Like we want that to be every day. Who wants this negative stuff? So thank you so much for all your help with that. And I love these conversations.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. They're so fun. I'm glad you find value in 'em, and I always like it when, we get to have a powwow session for a little bit.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.